They thought he was just another tired trucker. Big rig, worn cap, faded jeans. Nothing about him screamed danger. The bikers revved their engines, laughed, and blocked his path-flexing ego and steel in the middle of a lonely highway diner. Lot. But what they didn't know was this: that quiet man behind the wheel once led his brothers through the dust of Fallujah. He'd carried wounded comrades on his back while dodging sniper fire. He'd written letters for men who wouldn't live to send their last goodbye. That man had seen war, and more importantly, he had survived it. Tonight wasn't about pride or anger for him. It was about something far deeper: discipline, courage, and the quiet strength only a real war hero carries in his soul. When the bikers messed with him, they didn't know they were crossing paths with a former Marine Corps sergeant, a soldier, shaped by battlefield courage and bound by a code the world often forgets. This isn't just a story of confrontation. It's a military tribute to one of our unsung heroes, a living reminder of soldier sacrifice, silent strength, and the spirit of those we call forgotten heroes. The highway stretched endlessly across the desert, heat rising in waves from the asphalt like ghosts of memories long buried. Truckers call this stretch the long silence, a place where only the sound of your engine and the whispers in your head keep you company. For Sergeant James Dalton, those whispers came not from loneliness, but from memory. He wasn't always a trucker. Before the long hauls and diesel fumes, James wore the proud uniform of the United States Marine Corps. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He was the kind of Marine others looked up to, not because he barked orders, but because he didn't have to. His presence alone was enough, solid, steady, the kind of man who would walk through hell if it meant bringing one of his own home. Now the war was behind him, or at least that's what people believed. But veterans like James know the battlefield doesn't always end where the orders stop. It lives on, in the silence, in the way his hand instinctively reached for a weapon when startled, in the way his eyes always scanned exits, corners, windows. Hyper-aware, hyper-trained. Always a Marine. It was a late Thursday afternoon when James pulled into that dusty diner lot in Arizona. His 18-wheeler rumbled to a stop, its engine settling into a low hum. He stepped down from the cab, his boots landing with the kind of weight only men who've carried the weight of war know. Inside the diner, it was quiet, just a few locals. A waitress in her 60s with kind eyes and a radio humming old country tunes. James nodded respectfully, ordered black coffee and a BLT, and sat by the window where he could see his rig. Always watch the rig. Always know your exit. But before the coffee cooled, they arrived. 3 of them, loud, arrogant, jackets with patches. That meant trouble. The kind of bikers who weren't looking for a ride, they were looking for someone to push. They parked sideways across the lot, laughing, slapping each other on the back, and throwing glances toward James's truck. "Look at that beast," one of them grunted. "Bet he's got something worth taking inside." James heard every word. He didn't flinch. In his mind, he wasn't in a diner anymore. He was back in Fallujah. Different language. Same kind of tension. He watched quietly as they made their way inside. All swagger and noise. They ordered beers, though the place didn't serve any. The waitress politely told them so. One of them muttered something vulgar under his breath. The others laughed. James didn't move, but his eyes, sharp and calm, followed them like a hawk tracking the wind. "Hey, old man," one of the bikers called out across the room. "That your truck out there?" James looked up slowly. "It is. Looks like it's been through a war," the biker snorted. James simply nodded. "It has." The men laughed, but something in James's voice gave one of them pause. It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't fear. It was truth. "Where you coming from?" The biker pushed. James took a sip of his coffee. East, carrying supplies. West. What? You some kind of road warrior? The other mocked. James held his gaze for a second too long, then said quietly, "You could say that." That moment, just a few seconds, was when everything changed. The air tightened. The waitress froze. Even the radio seemed to lower its voice. Something passed between them. Something primal. A warning. But the young don't always listen to silence. As James stood to pay for his meal, one of the bikers stepped in his path. He was taller, younger, full of muscle, but not discipline. He looked James up and down. What, too good to answer a simple question? He challenged. James didn't raise his voice, didn't ball his fists. He just said, "Son, you don't want to do this." The biker sneered. "Or what? You gonna run me over with your walker, Grandpa?" A soft chuckle rippled from the others. But the lead biker didn't laugh. Something in James's eyes unnerved him, a depth, a calm. Like looking into the still water of a dark well, you never know how deep it goes. James stepped aside, gave the man a clear path. No anger, no threat, but as he walked past, he quietly added, "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. That's something we learned in the sand." And just like that, the clues were there. The sand, the tone, the posture. This wasn't some washed-up trucker. This was a Marine, a man who had led men into the mouth of death and brought them home. A real war hero. But the bikers, fueled by pride and ignorance, weren't ready to read between the lines. They followed him out. The desert wind picked up. Dust danced across the parking lot like faded memories. James climbed into his rig, but before he could shut the door, one of the bikers slammed his palm against the side mirror. "Don't walk away when we're talking to you," he barked. James sat still for a long moment, then slowly stepped back. Down the wind went silent. Inside the diner, the old waitress whispered, "God help those boys," because she saw it. In James's stillness, in his steady hands. She'd seen that kind of calm before when her brother returned from Vietnam. Men like James didn't need to shout to be dangerous. He looked the biker in the eyes and said one word, "Enough." Enough. That one word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed heavy, calm, and final. The biker standing closest to James, the one who'd smacked the mirror, took a step back without realizing it. There was something ancient in that voice, something older than violence. It was the voice of battlefield courage, carved out by fire, blood, and the weight of soldier sacrifice. But pride is a powerful poison. The second biker stepped forward instead, his leather jacket creaking, a switchblade suddenly appearing in his hand, not brandished yet, but visible. "What's your problem, old man?" he snapped. "You think this is your war zone?" James didn't blink. His hands hung loosely by his sides, relaxed, almost too relaxed. "You want to know about war zones?" he said quietly. "I buried 19, held one of them while he bled out on my lap. My boots have walked through places you can't pronounce, and I still remember the names of the boys who never came home. He paused. "You're not my problem. You're just noise." The biker didn't understand the weight of what had just been said, but the third man, the youngest of the group, he did. He wasn't laughing anymore. His smirk had vanished. Something about James, the way he stood, the way he looked through people instead of at them, it reminded him of his uncle, a veteran story he'd grown up hearing. A man who never raised his voice, but once dismantled 2 armed men in a bar without breaking a sweat. Still, the others were too deep into back down. "Let's shut him up." The lead biker growled, but what happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was efficient. James didn't fight like a man looking to prove something. He fought like a Marine trained to end threats fast with heroic acts that don't make the news but save lives every day. The switchblade never made it into the open. In 2 seconds, the biker's wrist was pinned, his arm twisted, and the blade clattered harmlessly to the ground. James's voice, calm as ever, said, "You hold a knife like that, you cut yourself." First, the other biker lunged with a wild punch, telegraphed and reckless. James shifted, sidestepped, and used the man's own weight against him, sending him stumbling into the dirt. No punches, no fury. Just precise, practiced control. The third biker didn't move. He looked at James, and for a split second, he saw it, the war, the loss, the silent, raging ocean behind the eyes of a man who'd faced down death and came back with scars deeper than skin. James looked at him and said, "Make the right choice, son. Go home." And the boy did, without another word. He backed away, grabbed his downed friends, and started helping them to their feet. The air had shifted. The desert, which had once been full of mocking laughter, was now still, watching Dot inside the diner. The waitress wiped her eyes. "I ain't seen anything like that since '68. She whispered. James climbed back into his truck without saying another word. His heart pounded, but his face didn't show it. The discipline was still there. So was the pain. Not from the confrontation, but from the memory it stirred Dot as the truck rumbled back to life. James stared out over the horizon, his fingers gripped the wheel, not like a driver, but like a soldier holding onto something he couldn't let go of. Dot, because that day hadn't just been about 3 punks picking the wrong man. Dot, it was about the weight he still carried. The weight no one saw. Flashback. 10 years earlier, Fallujah, Iraq. The sun was brutal, the sand blinding, and the sound of gunfire echoed across broken buildings like thunder with no rain. James was 31. Sergeant Dalton back then, leading a squad of young Marines boys, really through hostile streets where every corner could be their last. One mission, one street. One IED changed everything. Private Kessler was just 19, fresh out of boot camp. He'd called his mother every chance he got. James had promised to get him home, but promises don't stop shrapnel. James still remembered the moment. The explosion, the scream, and the sound of his own voice breaking through the chaos. Man down. He carried Kessler half a mile to the medevac zone. Blood soaked his uniform. He didn't cry, not then. But when Kessler looked up and said, "Tell my mom," I was brave. Something in James cracked. Kessler didn't make it. That memory haunted him more than the nightmares. He made it back. Kessler didn't. That's the thing about real war heroes. They don't call themselves that, because for every medal, there's a name they remember more than the honor they wear. James never told that story, not even once. Until today, when 3 strangers nearly pulled it from him with their ignorance. Back in the present, on the road again, James drove for hours in silence, the desert bleeding into dusk. Radio off. Windows down. Only the sound of wind and memory. It wasn't just a confrontation today. It was a reminder that forgotten heroes walk among us. Not in uniforms, not with medals, but in truck stops, warehouses, mechanic shops, and quiet neighborhoods. Men like James are the reason we enjoy peace. They fought the storm so others could have calm. And even years later, when no one sees their battles, they still fight them. Not with fists, but with honor, with restraint, with the invisible strength born only from sacrifice. Tonight, James would pull over somewhere quiet, sleep in his cab. And tomorrow he'd drive again. No thanks, no applause. Just the steady hum of a rig and the unspoken promise of a Marine. Leave no one behind. Night fell like a curtain across the open road. Stars blinked quietly above, and the highway stretched into blackness, endless, silent, and cold. James Dalton sat behind the wheel, his face lit only by the dashboard's soft glow. His hand stayed steady. But inside, the war still walked with him. Out here, where no one asked questions, he found peace, but never rest. Every mile was a memory. Every quiet stretch of road whispered names he'd tried to forget. Names like Kessler, Donovan, Ramirez. Brothers, not by blood, but by bond. James didn't talk much about the war, not to strangers, not even to family. Because how do you explain the feeling of carrying someone's last breath in your arms? How do you describe the sound of silence after the firefight, the heavy, suffocating silence of realizing you survived when others didn't? Those aren't things you post online. They're not for ceremonies. They live deep in the corners of your soul. That's why he drove. Because in motion, he could outrun the memories. Or at least try. But the events of that day, the encounter with the bikers, stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not fear, responsibility. A phone call at midnight at a rest stop near the Nevada border. James finally pulled over. Gravel crunched beneath his boots as he stepped out to stretch his legs. He leaned against the side of his rig, staring up at the stars that mirrored the night skies of Iraq so many years ago. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something told him to answer. Hello? There was a pause. Then a shaky voice spoke. Sir, I think you're the man who helped me today. My name's Danny. I was with those bikers. James didn't say anything at first. I followed them because I thought I had something to prove, Danny continued. But when I saw what you did, how you handled it, I saw my uncle. He served in the Gulf, never talked much. Same look in his eyes. I wanted to say thank you, and I'm sorry. James closed his eyes, took a long breath. You walked away, he said finally. That takes more guts than swinging fists. Danny's voice cracked. I want to do better. I want to change. But I don't know how. James looked out over the empty road. You start by honoring someone other than yourself. Letters never sent after the call ended. James reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old, weathered journal. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were letters he'd written, but never sent to the families of the men who never made it home. Tonight, for the first time in a decade, he read one aloud. To Mrs. Ramirez, your son died a hero, but I know that doesn't bring comfort. I carried him out of the fire myself. He was laughing seconds before the shell hit. He told me about your cooking, about his sister's graduation. He wanted to come home so badly. I'm sorry. We all are. I carry him with me every day. James paused. His voice trembled. But the tears didn't fall. Not yet. There's no tribute big enough for what your son did. But I hope, one day, people will remember not the battles, but the hearts behind them. The kind of courage that walks quietly into danger and never asks to be thanked. The weight of silence. There are things civilians don't see. They don't see the dreams interrupted by sudden gunfire in the night. They don't feel the survivor's guilt that wraps around veterans like a second skin. They don't know that a man like James would gladly go back just to bring one more brother home. He never wore his medals. They sat in a small box, tucked away under his bunk in the cab. Not because he wasn't proud, but because those medals weren't his alone. They belonged to the fallen. James didn't believe in hero worship. He believed in service, in sacrifice, in earning your rest through quiet, steady work. But deep down, a part of him wondered, would anyone remember us when we're gone? Not the headlines, not the politicians, but the men. The flesh and blood who paid with their futures for a freedom most never fully understand. That's why he didn't let anger consume him when those bikers disrespected him, because James knew what they didn't. Anger is loud. But real strength? is silent. A late-night radio tribute as he started the engine again. A voice on the CB crackled through. Breaker 19. This is Highway Joe out of Texas. We got word about a Marine out west who handled some trouble like a pro. Whoever you are, driver, thank you for your service. James smiled faintly. Another voice chimed in. Then another. Dozens of truckers across states, one by one, paid their respects. This one's for the forgotten heroes. You're the reason we ride in peace, brother. A salute from a Navy vet. Semper Fi. It wasn't loud, it wasn't official, but it was real. For the first time in years, James let the emotion rise. He pulled the rig over again, sat with his head in his hands, and let the weight lift just a little. Not because the pain was gone, but because, for a moment, he knew he wasn't alone. A man with no statue, James Dalton, would never have a monument. No movie deal. No parade. But that's not what matters. He is the living tribute. The moving monument. A breathing story. Of quiet valor, holding this country together 1 mile. One silent sacrifice at a time. Men like him are the reason we can sleep. And even when no one is watching, they keep moving forward. Morning light painted the highway in gold as James Dalton rolled westward. The storm had passed, but the echoes remained. Not just from yesterday's confrontation, but from a lifetime of battles fought in silence, both overseas and within. Pulled into a veterans' rest stop just outside California, a place only those who served seemed to know. No signs, no crowds. Just an American flag waving quietly above a modest stone bench carved with the words, "To those who never asked, for glory only a way home." James parked the rig, grabbed a small package from behind the seat, and stepped out into the cool morning breeze. In his hands was a folded Marine Corps flag, a photo of his old unit, and a dog tag that wasn't his. He knelt beside the bench, not for show, not for tradition, but because it was time. He'd been carrying Kessler's tag for over a decade, not as guilt, but as a promise. James laid the tag gently beneath the flag, whispered a few words, then stood tall. A quiet moment passed as if the wind itself paused to pay respect. Then he saluted, not as a trucker, but as a Marine. One last time. A stranger appears from across the lot. A young man approached, hesitant. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "Are you Sergeant Dalton?" James nodded. The man extended a hand. "I'm Andrew Kessler. David Kessler was my uncle. My family? They never knew how he died, just that it was sudden. My mom said you were there." James looked him in the eyes. That same green. That same fire. "Yes," he said quietly. "Your uncle was brave. He saved 3 lives that day, including mine." Andrew held back tears. "We always wondered if he was alone at the end." James shook his head. No, he was never alone. They sat together on the bench, sharing stories. For the first time, the weight that James carried felt lighter, not because he let go, but because someone else helped carry it. Invisible medals across this country. There are thousands of men like James, real war heroes who no longer wear uniforms but carry their service in their bones. They aren't in history books. They don't chase the spotlight. They live in silence, in the background of our peaceful lives. They are the truckers, the janitors, the grandfathers who flinch when a car backfires, the neighbor who never misses a flag ceremony, the man who always sits facing the door. And though the wars have ended for them, the battlefield never quite lets go. Still, they serve, through mentorship, through restraint, through quiet heroic acts the world never sees. And when life tests them, as it did that day in the desert, they respond not with rage, but with honor, because they are forged from something rare, something we should all remember, respect, and learn from. Final scene. The road ahead. James watched Andrew drive away, A new generation. A new chapter. As he climbed back into his rig, the sun rose higher. A new day. A new mission. He turned the ignition, rolled down the window, and let. The wind hit his face. In the side mirror, the veteran's bench grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind him, just like so many memories. But this time, something was different. He wasn't running from the past anymore. He was driving forward with it as part of him, not the weight of him. The desert stretched wide. The road waited. And James drove on.